And there's a lot of other subsects of that debate. And then you have things like methodological naturalism and materialism versus the acceptance of the supernatural. And these issues are they're the subject of intense debate within our culture. And they are alienating theists and atheists from each other, and they're alienating sometimes ourselves from our own brothers and sisters who happen to believe a little differently than we do. And this division's never really more visible than with the advent of the internet, right? Now, anybody who's under the age of 30, raise your hand. Okay, so you guys know this, yeah? You guys see this whenever you go on some video, whenever you go on a talk forum or something, you see all these, it's almost everywhere. It's like you go to a video about kittens, and then there it is, people arguing about God in the comment thread, right? Yeah? It's true. So I think this is a really visible issue. What I'm not going to talk about is the resolution of this issue. Ha! Fooled you. No, well, what I'm not actually going to be talking about is evolutionism versus creationism. I'm not going to expound on biblical interpretations of Genesis. That's not my topic today. Instead, I'm going to talk about the heart of the question, which I think, well, I believe, should be fundamentally shaping the way that we view the debate as a whole. And it should change the way that we experience the debate here. I also want to give credit where credit's due in this topic here. My understanding of some of these various cosmological arguments I've learned from William Lane Craig's ministry, Reasonable Faith, and I encourage you guys to check it out. It's a very good ministry, and he has a lot of good content. I'm not saying I agree with everything he believes, but it's pretty good. So let's go ahead and jump into this topic, yeah? All right, let's go. What does it mean to prove something? Okay, when someone says they've proven gravity, when someone says they've proven evolution or they've proven God, can they be correct when it comes to a scientific paradigm? Okay, can science prove it? What do you guys think? Within the scientific paradigm, actually, the answer is no. Okay, sorry. And the answer is, and you guys can disagree with me if you want, just don't throw tomatoes at me, okay? And I still love you, and you should still love me. This is not going to stop us from getting laughed out of the room if we say that gravity is a conspiracy or something, okay? The fact is, the way science works is a little different than sometimes the way we treat it. We can establish, using science, we can come to our understanding of what is the best possible explanation among other explanations for a phenomenon that we observe. But that is not the same as a logical proof or a 100% foolproof proof. Okay, so it's not the same. Everything in science is up to debate. If somebody comes along with a better explanation, we can debate it, right? So the answer is, in the scientific paradigm, if you have something that you disagree with and you have some good reason to disagree with it, it's up for debate, right? That's how science works. Science is restricted to exploring natural phenomenon, okay? And it finds the best explanation for these phenomenon among all possible explanations. Proofs now are abundant within the realm of philosophy and mathematics, okay? So I don't want people to think that I'm not saying you can't prove something. These are closed systems, the systems of statements and equations that can be correctly labeled as proof if they're consistent with the laws of mathematics and logic. But science is open. Science is different. This kind of may seem negative to you guys, and in some cases maybe it is. But this sort of openness, everything's open for debate, is actually a kind of a strength within it, because it allows us to never assume that we know something and to always look into what we think we believe about the world. So a lot of people who have anti-science or anti-academia sentiment or disillusionment with that, I think a lot of it comes from the fact that a lot of science can follow funding, okay? And that it may seem to be, it may seem that it's corrupt sometimes, or that it just follows the money, follows the grants. But it's not science itself that has the issue. The scientific exercise is not the problem. Okay? The scientific method is not the problem. Can I have somebody do my slides for me, because this is disconnecting? I appreciate it. So proofs are abundant within mathematics and logic, and like I said, we're going to talk about some of that today. So, like I said, though, this scientific method is not the problem. What are the boundaries of science? Right here. I oftentimes, in our culture, we're confronted with atheistic speakers that may or may not be scientists, and they write books, okay, and they go around and they lecture about atheism. And they speak about atheism as if it is a package deal with science, okay? And they say that atheism is what you must be to be a smart person and to believe in science, right? You guys see these people here. Every one of these people do this. Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens, Bill Nye, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking. I could keep going on. Neil deGrasse Tyson, etc. They're all atheists, and they all basically say that if you want to be smart, you got to be an atheist like us. And if you want to believe in science, science and atheism are like twinsies. Okay. So is this true? When people make a statement like this, is it true? That statement is a philosophical statement, When you say that I don't believe in God because science, it doesn't work. Why? Because science is within the natural realm. It studies things that can be quantifiable, things that can be observed physically. And so if you're an atheist running around saying, I don't believe in God because of science, you have made the jump from a naturalistic perspective to an atheistic philosophical perspective. You've gone from methodological naturalism to philosophical naturalism. And there's a difference there. Scientific inquiry is based on the idea of methodological naturalism. This is the practice of not considering supernatural causes as explanations for natural events. Okay, so some of us in here may think, oh, is this a bad thing? Consider this, though. If science didn't work this way, then we might perhaps still believe things like that when we sneeze, we're exhaling evil spirits, or that dust devils are actually devils, jinn, out there whizzing around. We might think things like the sun is a chariot being pulled across the sky. And of course, these are not things that are within our belief system as believers in the scripture, but these are superstitions, and these are things that people have believed about the world around them because they didn't know any better. Okay, methodological naturalism cannot assume a supernatural cause for a natural event. They have to look for something natural to explain it. Okay, does this make sense? Scientists practicing methodological naturalism can and may be religious. Okay, there's a lot of religious scientists out there who practice science in this way, and they still believe in God. So don't get the idea that this is somehow anti-religious. They simply have to exclude that as their explanatory cause. Okay, one wouldn't be taken seriously if they attempted to publish in a medical journal that the bubonic plague was God's punishment. Now, it may be that it was God's punishment, but in the scientific realm, they have to look at what the actual natural cause of it was, and that's a bacterial infection. Okay, this is how it works. Next slide. Now, there is a separation, as I'm saying, between methodological naturalism and naturalism as a philosophy. Philosophical naturalism believes that there is no supernatural realm and that this universe and the natural is everything that there is. This is different from practicing methodological naturalism. This is assuming, and now this is philosophy. This is a different area. This is not science. This is philosophy. So when you see atheists going around saying things like this, they're saying philosophical statements, not scientific ones. And we ought not to be threatened by them. Science doesn't have business producing philosophy. Science's business is studying the natural world that we live in. And true, much of philosophy may depend on science. There may be things within philosophy that sort of rest on science, but the scientific data itself is open to a range of philosophical interpretations. The atheist does not have the corner on the market for a science-integrated worldview, okay? Atheists are not the ones that are the only people that can believe in science, okay? There's plenty of religious people that are good scientists that do believe in God. And they do this because they understand there's boundaries between the practice of science and belief in God. Not that, don't get me wrong, not that God doesn't work with the world, not that God doesn't do things in the world, but how could we perhaps notice? God's laws are instituted by him. We don't believe that God did away with his law. We don't believe that he changes his law. And what's the difference between his law as the Torah and his law as the natural law? Okay, why would God bend and break and do things to his natural laws to work in the world? So to us, they may seem as simply natural events, but in reality, they may be God imposing himself in the creation through his own methods. Does that make sense? Okay. So to be fair, we have to understand that that perhaps we wouldn't notice it if we were looking just under the microscope. We'd have to just look for natural causes. But this doesn't mean that we're excluding supernatural causes for our own belief. Okay? Next time you hear, then, an atheist say that science has killed God, which is a claim that Nietzsche, whatever his name is, I can't pronounce it. Nietzsche. Okay, thank you. Whenever you hear this kind of statement, or God is not great, Richard Dawkins, right? They're pronouncing philosophical statements. These are not scientific ones. They have no way to prove it. To be fair, we also, using the scientific method, cannot do that either. But we have to work with logic, and I think this is really where we're going to have our best strength. Okay, logic to the rescue. Let's go to the next slide here. And I choose Spock because obviously he's like the emblem of logic. And I don't mean to disregard emotion, I just thought it was funny. Okay, emotions tell us things about how we're feeling, and that's important. But we need to acquire logic and be careful about how emotion-driven we can be in our belief systems. If we just believe whatever we want because that's how we feel, then we've lost any sort of credibility, right? Okay, doesn't mean emotions are bad, it just means we can't base our beliefs on them. So, since we've established a proper boundary for science, I want to add that, by the way, that boundary is not my making, but scientists themselves say that's the boundary of science. Scientists themselves would say that they can't go around saying that God doesn't exist. Okay, this is actual agreed upon boundary. So these other people, these atheists, are operating outside of their boundary. Let's look at some, since science doesn't operate in this realm and they can't disprove God's existence, I don't know if we should base our arguments on scientific proofs or evidences, although we can use scientific evidence for logical arguments. So let's look at some logical proofs for the existence of God. Now, like I said, I think these are far more compelling to a believer, and they're far more compelling to an easy atheist. To a hardened atheist, they're of course never going to be convinced. But to somebody who just really hasn't given it a whole lot of thought, maybe when they're on a comment board, they react violently whenever you bring up creation or evolution or something, and they will immediately throw up a wall. I myself have had discussions using logical arguments for God's existence with atheists, and they responded much more favorably. And they actually gave it a lot more thought, and it didn't throw their walls up right away because it was an angle that they hadn't heard before. Okay, so this is something to kind of think about. They, of course, you know, like I said, they have to be open-minded to do this, but I think it's a lot more successful, at least in my experience. Furthermore, since these are arguments are detached from that debate, they're of use to all persuasions of believers, whether they're old Earth, young Earth, gap theory, progression, creationist, evolutionary creationist, or whatever. However they interpret Genesis, they can all use these logical proofs for God. So they're open to everybody. And I think this is good because it puts forth a united front for believers to be echad and to say with one voice, this is what we believe, instead of this hodgepodge of different ways to interpret it. And then how are you supposed to have a debate when everybody's coming at a different angle? Do you see what I'm saying? So I think it might be a better way to approach it. And I hope that we'll consider this. So the argument that I'm going to talk about today, I can't obviously go over all of them. There are so many. But I'm going to talk today about the Kalam cosmological argument. Okay? Now, this sounds kind of like a scary thing, of course. It sounds heady and cerebral, but it's not too hard. Let me break down the terms here. Kalam is from the Arabic word meaning theology. Now, if you have something that's true and a bad person says it, is it still true? Yeah? Okay. So just to put that out there, this is from a Muslim theologian. Okay? He first developed this argument, but that doesn't make it any less true. Okay? And this man was Al-Ghazali, who created it out of concern for the streams of thought that he saw within Islam. These streams of thought in his time in the 13th century were adapting this idea that the universe was infinite, that it was that past was infinite, that it was never created and it just always was. And Al-Ghazali thought that this was bad because it made the universe, it made it so you didn't have to have God create it. Okay, so Al-Ghazali formulated this argument as a rebuttal to them. And it was revised in the current day by Dr. William Lane Craig of Reasonable Faith Ministries. So this argument is easily presented as a syllogism. Do you guys know what a syllogism is? It's a B, therefore C kind of argument. So here's an example. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, cool. So this is a syllogism. A, B, therefore C. So let's go ahead and look at the Kalam cosmological argument, and we'll look at it in its syllogistic form. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Yes? Premise 2. The universe began to exist, right? Therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, this is really simple, right? But it's actually very effective. Believe it or not, this seems like just no-brainer when you think of it on the surface, but it actually is a big statement. Consider the first premise. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Can anybody find any problems with this statement? Can you think of anything that begins to exist that doesn't have a cause? Anybody? Okay. I exist, therefore I have a cause. This table or this podium exists, it has a cause. What is the cause of this table? Well, there's 4 different causes. Aristotle came up with 4 different ways of classifying causes. The 2 that we're going to be talking about today are efficient causes and material causes. An efficient cause is the one who acts upon the material. The material cause is the stuff in which it is made. So this table has a cause, and that cause is Wendell. This was made by Wendell. He is the efficient cause, okay? And the material cause of this table is the wood in which it is made. That came from a tree. Does that make sense? And the material cause of that tree was a seed. And the efficient cause of that tree was either farming or another tree that dropped it. Okay, are you seeing how this goes? Everything that it begins to exist has a cause. Now let's think of some objections that atheists might raise to this premise. Objection 1, and I'm only going to go a few because this is, can get pretty complicated. Quantum physics demonstrates that quantum particles can come in and out of existence without a cause. Uh-oh. Did we just lose our first premise? Okay, what do we make of this? First of all, traditional physics models can't deal with physical objects that are incomprehensibly small, like atoms and quarks, and the particles that those are made of. For this reason, the field of quantum physics was born to study the way that these things work. Now, in this field of quantum physics, we find that small particles behave in strange ways. They pop in and out of existence seemingly randomly. And the problem, however, with this objection is that quantum particles do not originate from nothing. In fact, quantum particles arise from the quantum vacuum, which is something. Okay? Furthermore, it's not been demonstrated that quantum particles are caused by a non-causal force. There's at least 10 different explanations for why these particles are doing what they're doing, and only a few of them say that they're uncaused. The other ones say that they must have some reason behind them that we don't know yet. So basically, I think that this argument is really not a good one, because the quantum vacuum is not nothing. It's a very low energy state. Energy is something. Vacuum sounds like nothing, but it's not nothing. It's something. So our first premise still stands. Let's go to another objection here. The universe is eternal and never began to exist in the first place. Now here's where I want you to put your thinking yarmulkes on, okay? Because this might be a little cerebral. The idea that the universe is infinite has been around for millennia. Ancient Greeks didn't believe that the gods created the universe. They only believed that they ordered it. Some Greek philosophers saw matter as a necessary fact, that it just is. But our scriptures present a different view, that God created this time-space continuum as an act of will. In other words, the scripture supports the idea of a temporal beginning. The question we have to pose is, are infinities that are actual possible? Are actual infinities possible? Let's go back. Oh, hang on. Yeah, I haven't gotten there yet. Keep it on that slide there. So to illustrate this problem, or the answer to this problem, I should say, I'm going to use Hilbert's Hotel paradox. Has anybody heard of this? Okay. Hilbert's Hotel is let's first of all think of a normal hotel, and all the rooms are full, and somebody comes along and says, "Can I have a room?" What does the manager do? "Sorry, you can't have a room. No vacancy." But in Hilbert's Hotel, there is an infinity of rooms. And in this infinity of rooms, there is an infinity of guests. Every room is full. There is no room that is not full, but there is an infinity of rooms. Okay, are you following? So when the guest arrives to say, "Can I come into your hotel?" what does the manager do? Well, the manager moves the guest that's in room 1 to room 2, and he moves the guest that's in room 2 to room 3, and the guest that's in room 3 to room 4 into affinity. And then he says, "Okay, guest that's new, you can come into room number 1. Problem solved." But that didn't solve the problem, because that's ridiculous. That can't happen. Another problem with Hilbert's Hotel, let's say that an infinity of guests arrive, and they all want to join this hotel and live in this hotel. So the manager says, "Okay, we're going to move the guest that's in room 1 to room 2. We're going to move the guest that's in room 2 to room 4. The guest that's in room 3 to room 6. So he's doubling the room that the guest will go into. That leaves all the odd numbered rooms open, and all the infinity of guests can therefore move in. But this is ridiculous. This doesn't solve our problem. So this illustration shows that actual infinities cannot happen in the real world. So therefore, the real world is not infinite. Next slide here. But there's another few ways to dispel the notion of an infinite past. Let's say you have somebody that's been counting down from negative infinity, and he's finally, just today, he's reaching 0. From negative 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay? What caused him to reach 0 at this point in time? Why didn't he reach it yesterday? Why didn't he reach it an infinity ago? Okay? Do you see what I'm saying? There's nothing that would cause him to reach 0 now, because he's been counting for infinity. Another question is, we can't travel infinity. This I mean demonstrates that we cannot traverse infinities. You can't start on the end of an infinity because there is no end of infinity, and you can't have a logical progression of events on an infinity because there's no beginning and there's no end. Okay, so this illustrates that infinities are not able to be traversed. So if the universe was infinite, how did we get to today? Do you see what I'm saying? How did today happen? How am I here today in this time-space event talking to you all? How did you all get here today sitting in your chairs if the universe is infinite? Infinity can't be traversed, okay? So therefore, if the past is infinite, then an infinite regress, that's what it's called when you keep going back and back and back, that's illogical. We have to have a starting point for a temporal progression of events. There has to be a beginning point for it. So now let's do the objection that well, let's do let's look at this here. First of all, another evidence. Next slide here. Another evidence is the expanding universe. Okay, we know the universe is expanding because we can see redshift, the distortion of light waves from a distance, and we can measure that, and we realize that the universe is expanding further and further out. And it's sort of like this. Let's say you are a who that lives on Whoville, and Whoville's not on a flower, it's on a raisin. And that raisin is in a loaf of bread, and the loaf of bread is set to rise. And you're on that raisin, and you're looking with a telescope to the other raisins, and you're realizing, wow, these other raisins are moving away from me. When in reality, they're not moving away from you. It's not geocentric. They're all moving away from each other. They're spreading out. And that's sort of how many people have illustrated this expanding of the universe with a loaf of bread and raisins within it. So if you have an expanding universe, then you have to have a starting point. And this is something that atheists really don't like. Now, that starting point is what people call the Big Bang in common terminology. And atheists will dispute this by saying the universe in its Big Bang is perhaps just one in a long line of Big Bangs and Big Crunches. Have you heard of this? They'll say, well, there was a Big Bang, yeah, but that was just after a Big Crunch. Big Crunch is when everything goes right back to that original zero space between molecules point. And then it was a Big Bang before that, and then it went to a Big Crunch and to infinity. Okay, this is kind of ridiculous, isn't it? But we have to prove it using science, and so what they've found is they've measured all the energy in the universe, and they found there's not enough energy in the universe to sustain a Big Crunch and then another Big Bang. It just can't happen. Okay, so that's a moot point. There's not enough energy. Furthermore, it doesn't eliminate the problem of an infinite regress, right? Because then you have an infinity of Big Bangs and Big Crunches. So that's logically impossible. Then there's another one. They'll throw out, oh, multiverse. Okay? We're just one of a billion possible infinity of multiverses. And we're not special. We're just one of them that happen to be, inhabitable for life. But this doesn't take away the problem that the multiverse needs a beginning as well. Do you see what I'm saying? You always got to get back to the beginning point. Next slide. Universes can't just cause themselves. Space-time continuums just don't appear ex nihilo, out of nothing. There has to be a causal effect that is outside of the effect. And it has to be necessarily powerful enough to cause the effect in the first place. The causal agent, in this case, must be a personal being. Why? Because an impersonal force doesn't have discriminatory power. If an impersonal force was what caused the universe to arise out of nothing, why isn't there universes popping up all over the place? Why isn't there things popping into existence everywhere, randomly? Because it doesn't have any discriminatory power. It has to be a personal force. And this will show, using logic, that the creator, the cause of the universe, has to be personal. because it has the discriminatory power to choose to begin the creation and then to stop the creation after that. So I think with what we've talked about so far, that we've shown that the cause of the universe is both himself causeless, that he's timeless because he doesn't exist within the space-time sphere or continuum, that he himself is changeless, and he is personal, and then that he is incredibly and immensely powerful, and that he just is. And this is Yahweh himself. Yahweh, Yehovah, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, which means the existent one. He was, and he is to come. You see this? He's not within our realm. So, I think this is a wonderful argument to establish God's existence, because everything has a cause. The universe has a cause. Therefore, that cause has to be greater than the universe. You see what I'm saying? Does it make sense to you? Okay, let's go next here. What should not be done with the argument is to run around and then start posting it everywhere and start bashing people with it and say, haha, I got you. They're not going to see the light, because this argument has been said before. As I said, it's been around since the 13th century. Okay? It's not going to make somebody see the light. Why not? Why won't it? If you look into the other objections, I went over a lot of other objections because they're just plain stupid. They will come with anything. They will change their entire view of reality just to avoid a causal agent. And this is illustrating the fact that you can't just expect somebody to believe what you're presenting based on the facts alone. They have to have the open heart to receive it. It's like the ground that was hard, and the seeds were thrown upon it, and what happened? The birds ate them up, and they just rotted. Nothing happened. So there has to be fertile ground. There has to be a heart that is willing to accept it. No matter how good your argument is, no one will accept it unless their heart's in the right place. So here's an illustration from our Torah portion, because I always like to throw in a Torah portion thing. In Terumah, our Torah portion, we begin the portion with God requesting Moses conduct a fundraising effort for the furnishing of the tabernacle. He's to gather gold, silver, fine linens, dyes, and other implements to be used in the creation of the tabernacle. The Hebrew text, it says, Dvar al bnei Yisrael v'yikachu li terumah mat kol ish asher yidvenu levu tikachu et terumati. Okay, and that means, speak to the children of Israel and have them take from me an offering. Every person whose heart inspires him to generosity, you shall take my offering. Shemot, or Exodus 25:2. What are the operative words here? Vayikachu. Lakach, being the root of this word, means to take, right? Now, this is a forceful word. It means to take or to force. And it's in this text for a reason. But then it's contrasted with yidvenu, which means to offer up, to urge, or to give up, or to volunteer. So you have, hey, Moses, take it. Then you have them volunteer. It's two opposing sort of words, and then they're in the same text. What is this telling us? It tells us that Yahweh was going to require it of them, but that they had the choice to do it. Does this sound sort of like something else that you know in the scripture? That let's say in the beginning of when they were around the Mount Sinai, and he was giving them the Torah, and he says, "Do you accept it?" And they say, "All that you have said, we will do." They chose to accept it, didn't they? So they chose from their own hearts to do this, even though God's righteousness is unaffected by their choices. And they would have been righteous or unrighteous regardless of whether or not they wanted to follow him or not. You see what I'm saying? Some people run around and say that the Torah doesn't apply to Gentiles. Since they didn't accept it, therefore it doesn't apply to them, and they can do whatever they want to, and it doesn't affect anything. But I believe that the Torah is God's personal character, and it is, whether you accept it or not, going to judge you based on your actions and your heart. And so whether they chose it or not, he would require it of them. In the same way, whether we choose Yeshua or not, at the end, in the last day, he will require it of us. But we still have the choice to choose from our hearts. Choose you this day whom you will serve. Thank you. So this means, that we have to appeal to people's hearts. I don't mean to throw logic out the window, but you can't just rely on logic alone when you're witnessing. Go to the slide here. I have a verse for this. But in your hearts, honor Messiah, the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is within you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. So when you go out and you argue, and I say argue in the nice way, I don't mean to argue as in an argument. When you go out and you argue for God, and you argue for him and for his existence, do it with gentleness and respect. And always be ready to have an answer for what they're going to ask you. I think this is telling us that we have to be prepared for it. We should all be able to answer their objections, whether the objections are sincere or not. We should have an answer because somebody's listening, somebody that's not them, right? And perhaps they would make their choice based on what you say. However, like it says, you can't lead a horse to water, but you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? We can give them all the evidence. We can give them logical proofs, as we did today, and yet they still won't drink. This is because we need to appeal to their hearts, and the Holy Spirit has to be the one that does that. Next slide here. But how can they call upon him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him whom, if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? So these sort of arguments, I think, are for us to spread the word of God's existence and ultimately the good news, because you got to start with his existence in the first place. But they're also for us as a people, for any who have doubts or who have they have a hard time conceptualizing God being real. There's a lot of people that just they're never raised with it, and they don't have any concept of it, and it's hard for them to believe that he's real in their heart. And so I think these arguments, these logical arguments, are for our edification. Now, Paul is saying these things about telling others and being prepared to make a defense in a world that is full of philosophy, in a world that's full of arguments and ideas. I mean, the first century was exploding with them, okay? And so in the same way, we need to not shy away from this. So, next slide here. The Kalam cosmological argument is just one. There's a lot more that are worth looking into. For instance, Thomas Aquinas' 5 arguments, although he was kind of a crappy guy, he had some good arguments. His arguments from motion, from first cause, from contingency, from degree, and the ever-popular teleological argument, which is the argument from design. These are some of them, for example. You have all these other ones on the list, and I want you guys to check these out. If you can write them down, I want you to look them up, and I want you to learn these arguments because they're great arguments. And look into other ones, okay? These are important to know. So these arguments are feared by atheists because they don't really have usually a good answer, and they haven't usually given enough thought to the nature of reality to do well in this kind of discussion. They have to muck about in relativism and subjectivism to assuage their consciences, even though they live opposite of those ideals whenever they criticize us. Whenever they criticize truth, they're not being subjectivist, right? So they're completely disarming their own belief system. So the fact of the matter is, we have a good reason to believe. Thank you.